Okay, so let's see how to set up your sprites and animation for your game. I have just a basic setup here. Again, I don't even have a game object, so we'll go ahead and add one really quick. But I did import a sprite sheet. This is the scavenger sprite sheet. So let's go ahead and create an object really quick here. So I'm just going to say create empty, and I'm going to call this scavenger. Then I'm going to add a component because we need to actually have it drawn to the screen. So I'm going to type in sprite renderer. You notice I use search this time to make it a little bit faster. And then I'm going to add an animator to it. All right, so this is the setup for my object that I'm going to animate. Here I have my sprite sheet. Let's go ahead and take a look really quick at the sprite sheet settings. So if you look over here, the texture type is a 2D in UI. This makes sense because it is just a 2D image. This single tells us whether or not this is a single sprite or like a sprite sheet. And since it's a sprite sheet, we're going to say multiple. Pixels per unit tell us, how many pixels are going to be one unit in the game. In Unity, one unit is generally considered 1 meter, and that's sort of how the physics systems work. So you really want to just sort of think about this in terms of how many pixels it should be based on the height of your character or whatever it is, what makes sense in terms of the number of pixels per unit. I'm going to say something like 72-ish because that sort of makes sense. And then mesh type, I don't have to worry about that. And then let's see anything else here. Maximum size. All of this just pretty fairly straightforward stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the sprite editor, and I'm going to say apply those settings. And this is what the sprite editor looks like. Whoops, I lost it there for a second. Let's go ahead and grab this. And I'm just going to drag it here so it's in my system. And if you notice this sprite sheet, all of these sprites are the same, dimensions. So this is a very nicely laid out sprite sheet, unlike the one for Braid where they're kind of different sizes and you can't tell the dimensions. But each one of these sprites has a certain, width and height. So I can, what I want to do is tell Unity to divide this texture into individual sprites based on the width and the height. And so what I do is I come over here and I see this slice, and I'm going to tell it how to slice it, and I'm going to say by cell size, and it's defined as 64 by 64 by default. So I'm going to click on slice because I think that's what it is. I'm looking at it, I'm like, no, that's clearly too big because there's 4 characters in there. So this must be 32 by 32. I'm going to do slice again, and now I can see that my grid sort of lines up evenly with my sprites. So now that I say slice, so that's done. And then there's other things you can do if you want to take a look at the sprites to make sure you know where the boundaries are. If I click on this little, red, green, blue icon here, it'll give me just sort of the alpha channel, and then this shows me, the black is where the alpha is transparent, so I can sort of see what the characters are, and then the white shows me where it's opaque. Okay, so it looks like my grid lines up just perfectly. So now that I've done this, I can just say apply. All right. And now that I've applied, you'll notice that my sprite sheet has changed. There's a little arrow over here, and if I click on it, I can see my individual sprites that have been pulled out of it. So this allows me to select, more than one sprite, and this will become important for the animations. All right. We also have this little setting here that lets us change, various settings for it. So the pivot, for example, is set to center. Maybe your sprites pivot on the left corner. You can change that. That's this little circle here in the middle. But for us, it makes sense to have them centered, right there in the middle. And then it gives dimensions. You could change it here. So it lets you customize what you applied with that. Now, that's not the only way to do it. You can do an automatic. If you do an automatic, it'll use the alpha channel to try to figure out where the cells are. And for the lab that you're going to do with the braid animations, you're going to want to do automatic. So that's set. All right, so now that we have all of this, we want to go back to our scavenger, and I'm going to go back to my scene here. I'm going to close this up. Now, I have a controller, but I also need to set up a few other things in order to get animations to work. So I'm going to come over here to create, and I'm going to say animator controller. and I'm going to call this scavenger controller. And this is going to control the animations. In essence, it lets you set up a state machine to determine when each animation should be fired. So coming back over to my animator, okay, I clicked on my scavenger up here. I'm going to drag my animator controller onto my controller here for my animator. And then this will let me set up my animations. Okay. So now I need to open up my animator window. Or my animation window. There's two different windows. Okay. The animation window is designed for creating your animations. And one thing to understand about animations is that we can animate basically any property that is on your class. So, I have a sprite renderer. I can animate various things like the sprite or the color or whatever. And I do that by creating these animation clips down here in my animation. So with this selected, and that's important, you need to select your scavenger, not double select them. You're going to click create, and it's going to ask you for the name of your animation clip, and I'm just going to call this idle, and this should get saved, right here. And now you'll notice that my window has changed. I don't have a create clip, and that's because my animator now has some animations associated with it. And all of the animations I have, all of my clips, are going to now appear in this little tiny drop down box here. So I'm in the idle clip. In order to create my animation, I'm just going to open up my scavenger here, and I'm going to select the first 6 frames like that. So what I did is I clicked on the first one, and then I held down shift, and then I clicked on the last one, and it gave me 6 sprites. Then I'm going to drag them over to my timeline. All right. Now each one of these dots represents what we call a keyframe. And a keyframe is a point in time when it's going to change the state of a particular property. This particular property over on the left, in fact, the sprite of the scavenger, is going to get changed every keyframe to one of these sprites. Okay, this is how we're going to get the animation. Now the problem is this is really too short. If I were to, go and look at this and hit play, what I would see if I get really close is that my guy looks like he's having a seizure or something, and that's not what we want. And we need to be able to slow this down. So what we want to do is take the time right here. We have these bars, these little tiny blue bars, and if we grab these, we can stretch out how much time has to elapse from the start to the end frame. Now, unfortunately, I only grabbed the first few, so that's a bummer. So I'm going to Command Z to undo it. And I'm also going to grab these and stretch it out to about 2 seconds. Okay, what I did is I just sort of selected them all and then drag it out to 2 seconds. So that when I hit play at this point, you'll see that the animation looks a lot more normal. You might want it faster or slower, just depending on how you like it. But this is how we set up the animation, and so I think that looks fine. You'll notice that we have other animations here that we could set up. In particular, it looks like there's some kind of maybe dying animation that we could set up. If you wanted to do that, you would click on this down, and then you would say create new clip. And then you would again be asked for a name, and you could give it a name. The reason that we give them names is because, of course, as you can guess, we can use code and refer to the animations by that name to do the setup. Okay, and so let's see, where is that dying? I think this was it, maybe. Just take these. And yeah, it sort of looks like he's dying, I guess. Something, I don't know. It's weird. Okay, so that's how we set up our animations. And I will do another little video to talk a little bit about the state machine, but I just wanted to show you how to do the initial setup. Thanks.